Today on Riffs, Spirits, and Gear, we check out the Loki MIDI bass plugin from Solemn Tones. I have done several plugins from the homies at Solemn Tones, including the Odin, MIDI guitar plugin, the Mjolnir MIDI drums, and now they have come out with, of course, the Loki MIDI bass sampler, which is a plugin that replicates the DI of a bass guitar all the way down to the low C, lower octave of C. It's low. I don't know. Yeah, it's like really low. And like the Odin Deluxe and the Mjolnir drums, Loki Bass does not require contact. It is its own instrument, plugin, sampler thing. There's no contact. You don't need contact. It's all good. No contact. Loki Bass also lets you spit out a DI or a process tone if you aren't liking the bass amp sims that you happen to have on hand. There's lots of bells and whistles that we will get into in just a minute, but first, let's hear how it sounds in a mix. So now that we got the mix out of the way, we're gonna get into playthrough mode. We're gonna deep dive Loki Bass just a little bit. We're gonna go over some of the features and hear some sound samples, and I'm gonna show you how I dialed in the tone that I got with Loki Bass. Let's do it. I basically have two instances of Loki Bass, and those two instances are being bussed to just my regular bass bus, and I have some regular processing going on, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but what I want to drive home is how I used it, and I used it as a DI track, as I would a normal recorded bass. So I have my two tracks right here. It's the same MIDI. The MIDI is no different from each track. The Loki DI track is just that. It's just a DI. It's not affected at all. The Loki amp track down here is, I'm gonna open this up. It is the Loki DI. And then that is going into the stock Presonus bass amp sim. Nothing special. And then obviously in parallel with that, I have the other Loki Bass DI track, and that is with no amp sim on it, and I can use that to blend it in. That's how I usually do most of my bass tracks. I'll have an amp and a DI blend, and I will just play with the levels to see what I like most. On the affected track, on the DI, I added some low, mid, and high. I added quite a bit of mid. Not loads of mid, it's not maxed out or anything like that, but I really kind of wanted a mid-range punch that the stock DI was kind of missing for this track. I left the humanize where it was. I wasn't really concerned with the humanization portion of it. Notice I have crank engaged. That is basically gonna spit out full velocity on all your hits, no matter what you have going on in the MIDI. It's gonna take that MIDI, it's gonna make everything a 127 or 100% velocity. So you can just drive home that levelness that will also aid you in compressing later on down in the signal chain. Also notice under the DI that you cannot click enforce. Now enforce is really for the affected tone, not the DI tone. And what enforce is it's adding a sine wave, which is a common trick that you would normally have to do outboard of a plugin This is doing it for you. So it's adding a nice sine wave to the lowest frequency to give you even more levelness. This is an old trick, doubling up an actual bass part with the sine wave, basically MIDI bass, to give further tightness and cohesiveness in your bass parts. That's a really cool feature, and I was surprised to see it in this plugin, because I've never really actually seen that within a bass plugin. That's really, really cool. Also notice that Loki Bass is telling me active key switches. Now right now I have alternate picking engaged, and if I want to know what those are, I just go to key switches down here, and it simply tells me if I want to add another MIDI note to engage alternate picking, down picking, just up picking, muting, harmonics, tapping, and scrapes. I can do all that in addition to just regular plucking, you know, as you would expect, regular bass note playing, but the modifiers add a lot of dimension to that playing. Now the humanize function that I touched on before, I didn't feel the need to touch it. I'll play you, I'll isolate this track and I will play it for you, and we're just gonna kind of play around with the humanize and also the EQ and the crank and the raw, just so you can hear how this sounds. Now, again, I'm going through an amp sim. This is meant to be blended in with the DI tone. So if I went ahead and just played the actual bass track, it sounds like this. Now, this sounds really good, and the reason being is there are over 3,000 samples using an actual Dingwall bass, and it is recorded down to a low F, and then it's pushed to a lower C for the really, really, really detuned stuff. So your entire range, I mean, basically, it's almost like a piano, but in bass form. You have such a range of notes that this would be perfect for on the go. If I was in a plane and I wanted to program just a bass track or a scratch bass track, in addition to Solemn Tones' drums and MIDI drums and MIDI guitar, I could create an entire track on a plane, on the go, on my MacBook without actually having an instrument, and it would sound good to boot. That's pretty cool. Now, even if you do normally have the means to track a traditional electric bass guitar, having Loki Bass to even reinforce your existing bass tracks is a no-brainer. This is an old studio trick that is commonly used, especially in metal, but in other genres as well. And Loki Bass has a lot of features that you normally have to spend a lot of time building in MIDI with a synth plugin, and you have to filter it to get that really, really nice clean low end, etc., etc. Loki Bass does all that for you, in addition to being a really good sounding virtual instrument. It is most impressive, and you know what? It gets the Beard seal of approval. All applicable links down below in the description. You've been wonderful. I've been Fluff. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.